Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Michelle Hobby-Mears, and I am based out of Orange County, California. I work at Soka University of America as the Associate Dean of Students.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so happy to have you. And, I feel like this episode has been a long time coming because you've had such an important role in my own development when I was a student at SUA and many years after, right? I frequently visit the campus, and whenever we meet up and exchange stories and updates, it's always such a joy. And I want to learn more about what brought you to the work that you're doing over there at Soka University. I feel like it's definitely a big calling and like deeper purpose that not only brought you to a place like Soka, but had you staying there to continue the work and developing really important programs for all of the student population. And you do it with such heart. So, wanted to learn more from your wisdom, from your experiences, and yeah, would love to hear more about some of the milestones of your journey as an educator. So wanted to pass it over to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. It's wonderful. I love your vision for this podcast and to be able to share a little bit of my story. I feel privileged to do that. You're talking about my journey, at least with Soka. It dates back quite some time ago. Soka University of America in Aliso Viejo opened its doors in 2000, and that was 1 year before the first class arrived. And I had the pleasure of serving as the director of student activities and residential life. And so, as you can imagine, 1 year before the students came, I needed to develop the student activities department. I needed to develop the residential life department program services. And doing that for a population of students that I had never met was really a wonderful challenge. Certainly it was a special time for everyone working at Soka and everyone who was behind Soka to essentially open this institution from the very beginning. So to be a part of that was, just almost difficult to conceive of, that you're going to be a part of something, a groundbreaking, um, an institution that has an incredible vision, an incredible mission. I found out about Soka because I was living in Aliso Viejo. And at the time, it was unincorporated. And so it was part of Laguna Hills. And I was pretty involved in what was going on in our soon-to-be city. At that time, I had learned that this university was being built, and I was working at another university at the time, and UC Irvine specifically, and I was just floored that, little Aliso Viejo, that, hasn't been around for very long was actually going to be put on the map because a university was being built. And so I inquired. I saw a small article in the local newspaper, the Aliso Viejo News, announcing that Soka was being built, and there was a phone number. And I placed that call, and there's a gentleman by the name of Eric Hauber, who was instrumental in many ways in the building, the development of Soka University. I had a chance to meet with him. I had a chance to meet with Archisawa and also with the current president, Ed Fiesel, and learned so much about the vision and, this expectation of an institution that would bring people from around the world to study there, that I was ready to sign up. And ultimately, that's what I did. I applied for the position and fortunately got it. And it's hard to believe for me that I have been there for now. This will be my 26th year come September.
Wow, that's incredible. And I appreciate the way that you shared that story with such heart and such deep like reflection, because it is truly like difficult to put into words the timing of things, right? And the way with which those events coalesced in you hearing about the institution, and then also the opportunity to play an important role in building out what that vision is. And you really emphasized, when you first heard about Aliso Viejo kind of coming to be, and then this university, that there was this thing about the mission, right? That you were connecting with important figures already there, and you were learning about the vision of it. And you mentioned bits about how it was a university that would bring students from all around the world together. But could you speak a little bit more to what exactly sold you about the vision itself,
Hmm.
and how that ties into again, like the bigger purpose of like why it was being created? Because, again, you were like coming at it from like brand new, like don't know anything about Soka. So what were some of the aspects that you heard that really sent green flags for you and then got you excited to want to be part of that?
Yes. I think there were multiple elements. I learned that Soka means to create value. And it resonated so deeply with me. It is, in many ways, how I identify my focus in life. It's outward facing. It is about contribution. It is about serving. It is about giving. And, much of that is connected to my faith. To be able to be a part of an institution that is guided by these principles that um, focus on doing for others, contributing in a way that is meaningful with the values of humanism and also pacifism and, um, you know, um, recognizing this relationship that we have within this environment that we're living. So all living creatures. I mean, these are things that I believe in, and certainly they're things that I want to actively pursue and develop in my own life. I don't feel that I have arrived, but I do believe that, foundationally for me, it is not about self-serving. It's about serving, outside of oneself. And so that was a significant draw for me, um, because again, it aligns with my values.
And, I love what you're sharing, because it really speaks to many of the same values that really drew me to the university as well, and important important lessons that were impressed upon me when I was a student at the university. And I think in large part because of individuals like yourself who have anchored themselves in words, like really powerful words, like faith and like service and contribution, right? These aspects that you brought up. And I wanted to ask though, because I feel like while I'm sure, you had really important professional experience working at University of Irvine, right? And that, of course, was really important in helping you to step into a role where you could build out new programs and a new department. But I also think that the word faith and like kind of how you were established in your own grounding was really important for an institution to be able to see this is someone that we really need to further our mission. And I wanted to ask, could you speak a little bit more about your faith and how that has like anchored you in your life and yeah, and really set yourself up to then be that much more receptive and like sensitive to the calling that you found at SUA at Soka?
I like that you use the word calling. I think there are many parts of my life where I have felt a calling. And maybe before I tell you about my faith, I will say that one of the callings that I had that shapes who I am today, one of the things that shapes me today was when I graduated from college. I graduated from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a historically Black college. And I was presented with an opportunity to travel, to take a job overseas. And I loved traveling, and in particular, being able to experience different cultures and the different elements of the cultures, from language, food, history, and so forth. And this opportunity was in Japan. And at the time, I was in my early 20s, and it just was so intriguing what was presented to me. I would have an opportunity to teach English, and I spent about 3.5 years there, and it was a long time for someone in their early 20s to make that commitment. But it was one of the best decisions that I made. It opened the door for many more opportunities for me. I had completely immersed myself in the language and the culture, um, and, made some wonderful connections with people, these relationships that have stood the test of time. And I think it's from there that it, I guess, awakened in me this idea that I could commit myself to a career where I would be working with people from around the world. And so that's how I then went on to the University of California, Irvine, and then ultimately to Soka. But you had asked the question about faith. Faith informs my life. I grew up as a Christian from childhood, and had an opportunity, after being introduced to the faith by my parents, and, what was accustomed to go to church service every Sunday, then became an opportunity for me to make the decision as I got older about what I believed in. And the foundation was powerful, in a way that I could, as um, a young person old enough to make a decision about what I believed in, to really take and be what I claim as my path, my journey, my direction, my compass. So it has been, as I reflect on my life, faith is not on the side. The person that you know is because of my faith. How I engage with people is because of my foundation in my faith, which I think in many ways is, again, kind of going back to Soka. There's a connection there, right? Soka has its foundation in lay Buddhist principles through Soka Gakkai. Um, a different tradition, but there are so many connections in terms of values. So yeah, my faith sustains me, it directs me, and yeah, it's an introduction to who I am.
Most definitely. And I really like how you phrase this about faith. It's something that's not on the sidelines, and it's really, what you see before you, right? That it's such a central component of how you present and how you show up for others, for students, for friends and family, and that it's not something that is like compartmentalized, right? Or kind of like sectioned off with all the other aspects of who you are. And that's something that I can really appreciate, and what I have come to start to recognize within my own sense of faith as a Buddhist, that really, I think individuals who are able to put faith core to who they are, or like maybe you can even substitute faith with values, right? If it's like religion is not, what you're wanting to be part of, I think it really shows in like the kind of sense of clarity in decision making, the clarity in how they, again, convey themselves through words and through their actions. And and I think that level of like consistency, that then compounded over time, really makes for striking individuals of character. And I think the word character for me comes up a lot when I think about faith, because when I meet individuals who have strong faith, uh, more likely than not, they are individuals with great character. And I know that that's something that you interact with so many young people who are trying to make sense of kind of where they're at this critical juncture of their life. And, they're maybe in their like 18 to, I don't know, 25, more of like the traditional kind of student age population. But there's so much going on. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, in terms of the formation of those students' characters, and how you see aspects of yourself reflected in that, and what are the ways in which you're able to support them in your capacity, not just as a professional, as an administrator, but also just as a friend, as a human being, right? As someone who's been there, done that, and wants to see them succeed. So
Yes.
curious about that connection with like character and faith. And then it also goes into the mentorship,
Yes.
area.
Um, well, I would say that um, my own sort of sense of self is that I'm still growing, I'm still developing. I think there are things that we were taught, even socialized into, that, over time we find value, or some elements of it we don't find value. And we make decisions on how we want to govern our lives. Again, whether rooted in faith or something that, values that guide us. And I think in reflecting, I'm evolving, but in those times where I'm reflecting, I'm thinking about where maybe the um, what was presented to me was limited and did not fully reflect um, diversity of thought or perspective, or a way of being. And sometimes we can find ourselves somewhat siloed, um, uh, just around people who share a similar view, same view, and you don't have this opportunity to expand your thinking. I think for me, the benefit of traveling, and working in an environment where, there are people who come from so many different places and have had different life experiences. If you aren't exposed in that way, you're you're going to stay in perhaps a box. Maybe this is not true across the board, but the more exposure we have, and in particular, where maybe a viewpoint or viewpoints that you had in mind get turned upside down on their heads because you've now had this experience that should inform what the reality is, or that there's more than one way of doing things, or more than one way of being. And, there's something so beautiful about being a part of a group or association or organized religion, if you would, a community of people who believe. As long as there's this perspective of openness and an opportunity to recognize the connections that we have with people who may not identify in the same way. And so that's, I think, also part of the beauty of Soka. Nearly 40 countries represented, 6 continents out of 7, all in one place on 103 acres, less than 500 students. You're going to have an opportunity, in particular, if you come from a place where, there are few people who identify outside of the majority. If you come from a homogenous, country, chances are you might not really have the kind of exposure to all kinds of different people unless you travel. And so kind of relating this to faith. So you have this opportunity to engage with people from different faith traditions, faith backgrounds, and you learn so much more, you grow so much more as a result of that. And I just find that to be so beautiful and so captivating to me, despite the fact that I grew up where I was a part of a particular community. I was part of, um, you know, a particular church with, you know, certain people who went to that church or those churches, as I've been to a number of churches, been a part of a number of churches. But once you have this opportunity to expand even more so, um, it you really do begin to touch this, I don't know, concept, reality of what being global means, right? Yeah, it's hard for me to fully express the significance of that and what it means for students to be able to, on this campus, engage with so many different people. On this campus, students have access to so many different people, so many different backgrounds. And all they have to do is be receptive and
And
open.
if
Yeah.
if and if I may just add to what you've been sharing about, it kind of brings this image to my mind, and I've heard this analogy used before of, different people, we can think of them like different potatoes in like a knapsack. And the fact that they're close in proximity, they're kind of somewhat, forced into like, interacting and rubbing up against each other. And so the more you're shaking this like knapsack, the more they're in effect kind of polishing themselves, and revealing a certain kind of like gleam to them that wouldn't have been possible if they were just a solitary potato in the bag by themselves. And I feel like that kind of speaks a little bit in simple terms to what you're describing is going on at Soka University. And I can attest from my own experience as a student, I definitely had my fair share of cultural shocks, if you will,
Right.
where I would come up across like an individual who maybe held a very different belief from me, right? Or spoke about an experience that was really powerful and very true for them, but was I had completely no idea. I couldn't fully empathize with. And other times when I was challenged on my own kind of assumptions because of my own upbringing and my own worldview and my own reality, like you were talking about. And I think that it's this process. Maybe it's trial and error. Maybe it's a process of humility where you come to grips with how diverse this world is, and how, bursting your bubble is not the end of anything, but it's really the beginning of a new possibility, a new kind of relationship that we develop. And I think that, going back to not just like the faith component, but the character component as well, is that we're able to grow our sense of character in relation to others. And yeah, the Soka University is just that place where we're really able to bring out our best version, the best version of ourselves. And I think travel is a really incredible way to do that, right? Whether it's students from around the world coming to one place, right, to study,
Right.
but
Right.
then there's also the mandatory study abroad where now they're going
Yeah.
back out into the world and creating their own memories and then being able to share that with each other. And you spoke about your time teaching English abroad in Japan for over 3 years. And so you fully understand just how powerful that perspective taking of being in another culture, appreciating what they have and growing, evolving as a person. And so you kind of spoke about this, there's this deeply rooted aspect of how you've grown in your faith from local churches, but then you're also speaking to this global dimension of having interactions with people from various different backgrounds. And I feel like that sets us up really nicely for a conversation about what being a global citizen means, because I feel like you're already articulating so much about it. But I'd love to hear from you if there's like a specific, I don't know, like phrasing of global citizenship that really speaks true to the work that you're doing at Soka University, or if there's like your understanding of global citizenship, like over these 26 years at Soka, like how does it kind of like ring for you? Like how do you kind of convey that to your students about like what it means to be a global citizen?
I have not focused on defining it for students. I think um, if anything, there is um, a kind of understanding that I think people take away from being at Soka over a 4-year period of time. And obviously we have our graduate school as a 2-year program. I think that from a very personal perspective, I haven't fully sought to even define it. And by that I mean there are elements of that I see are a part of global citizenship. But in some ways, it's hard for me to be so specific because I feel it is for everyone. And because it's for everyone, there's an opportunity for each person to define for themselves what that means. The thought of developing oneself, even thinking about character, is something that is so individualized. And I believe that global citizenship certainly suggests that we are all a part of it. We're all a part of this global landscape. We are global people. And there's something to be said about recognizing our connections to one another. And then what does that look like? What does that mean? How are we to engage? How are we to connect? At the university, we talk about dialogue. We talk about what it means to, in some ways, be outwardly focused, at least as it relates to leading a contributive life, as the mission details for us. As a global citizen, it is the recognition of others and the connection to others. It is not about othering. It is realizing that, for me, that I exist, I am, because we are. And I see that every day on campus. I see that in the conversations that are taking place. I see that in the relationships that are forming. I see that in um, um, a dedicated focus for so many of our students in the classroom, yearning to learn, yearning to grow, yearning to understand. So I may disappoint by not providing, a formal, definition, but more of kind of a connotation, I guess, of what global citizenship means to me. I feel that we all have a responsibility. I feel that we all have a responsibility as global citizens, an awareness of where we are, how we're engaging, how we treat one another, how we treat this environment this home that we live in. Yeah.
That's beautifully said. And I love how you started off by making it clear you're not here to say what global citizenship is for everyone, right? So you speak from a place of your own, positionality and your own rootedness, and also recognizing that as an administrator and someone who many of the students look up to and like come to for support and advice, that your words are powerful, and that you're also understanding that this is an opportunity, right? Being at Soka, for them to discover it themselves, right? How much more fulfilling and deeply rooted that is for them to acquire their own understanding through their own questioning, rather than just simply being, handed the answer on a silver plate, just because, let's say, that's the easier thing to do, or that's the more convenient thing to do, or that there's some other agenda being, on the person's mind that everyone should believe in this way or that. Because then that's antithetical to what I think a lot of the kind of critical thinking mentality that the learning environment's trying to cultivate for those students. But from what you shared about global citizenship as it pertains to not only the mission and what you understand it, but also in your own experiences, I think you did a lot to cover much of kind of what it means to live a contributive life. You've mentioned this multiple times already about this um, the service that comes from being more, outwardly focused. And I think it's not to say that it's just outwardly focused without doing the inner work. Actually,
Sure.
I mean, I think my understanding from what you said is that like, oh no, you have to do the inner work as it pertains to maybe it's the faith route, or maybe it's in terms of your own passions and what you do and the work. But from there, being able to contribute means you have, you know, done the work necessary to cultivate certain skills and mindsets that would be of use, right? So
Yes.
interconnection and like the not othering of other like of people from different backgrounds. um, one thing that I really liked, and maybe you could share more about this. You said it's the students at Soka, and I'm sure students in general, but maybe in the condition, like the environment at Soka, it's so special. It's you know, of course, very privileged, right, with the resources that they have available, but they're coming into this learning environment with a yearning to grow. You said yearning to grow, a yearning to understand. And I think I really like that word yearning, that it speaks to this drive that they have to go beyond their immediate, you know, understanding or reality, and also to recognize that they're not going to be able to fully step into that new plane of understanding just by themselves, right? It's in relation to others, right? Through dialogue that you talked about. And so I'm curious to learn more about, you know, again, as it relates to this yearning to grow and yearning to understand, the ways in which your office is able to support students in that capacity through programming, through one-to-one office hours, through events that are happening. I know there's so many things that are happening. Yeah, so maybe if you can share just a few of those, that I'd love to hear about how you're really supporting these students in their own development as global citizens.
Yes. I would say that the way in which at least I think the best method so far for me in doing this work in supporting students is to give them space to conceptualize, to envision something that they want to build. So, of course, all student organizations on campus, clubs, affinity groups formed because students felt there was a need or a desire. And oftentimes it's centered around sharing culture. Whether it's through performance, music, dance, whether it was through history, sharing lived experiences, that students could conceive of something that would be meaningful for people who shared similar experiences, backgrounds, but also thinking about those who have not experienced, certain elements of particular culture. Um, and so in some ways, it's remarkable that, um, a population of under 500 students would have 40, roughly 40, 44 clubs operating and affinity groups. Um, it really speaks to, I think, this desire to create, to build, to identify where there is a need for something and to be able to not only form it, but essentially develop events and programs, facilitate workshops, whatever it is that they envision, that they're able to do that. Uh, I will tell you some of the powerful things that have happened as a result of students coming together. Um, we have um, groups that have contributed back to the university, whether it's through performances or even being able to educate the community about about a culture or about an identity group. As an example, we, recognize that our campus population, students, staff, and faculty, um, may have different needs. We think about those who identify as disabled, how important it is for us to have things working in a way universally so that everyone has access. Um, but to have a student group, step forward and say, hey, here are some areas that university needs to look at. We need to make sure that this is functioning properly, doing an assessment of accessible doors, all the initiative of students. That's a great example in my mind of how students so many students desire, sometimes out of their own interest, to be able to have something that is meaningful for them, but then also sharing that out so that the community at large has benefit, that the community at large, if they don't identify with whatever that focus is, whatever that identity group is, because they don't identify themselves, but then they have this opportunity to understand better how important certain things are and what we can do as a community, not just administrators, but the community at large, to be aware and sensitive and supportive.
Wow. I've heard it said that universities should function in essence like, the society in miniature. And the way in which you speak about really listening to the students, understanding that their powers of perception and their proactive stance on wanting to create and make change, and then for as an institution to really grapple with that and really take the proper actions to meet students right where their interests are and where they feel change needs to be made, and to work together, right, through dialogue. I feel like, that's, what you're conveying, and what a great world that would be if that were to be expanded further into the realms of, all pervading all society. And I think, again, it's not just the desire to grow and to understand, but as you said, that desire to create, I think really sets up Soka students to understand that by the time they graduate, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and it's going to take time. It may not be the same kind of environment that they are accustomed to with SUA and the kind of responsiveness maybe that one could say their concerns are being addressed with, but nonetheless, to still pursue those as worthy endeavors and to make careers out of that and to spend their lives in that, contributive stance, that outward, kind of focus of like, I want my environment to reflect these deeply held inner beliefs and ideals that I have. And I think that through affinity groups, through the clubs that are created, and all that kind of is entailed with the maintaining of those clubs and the support and the advice that they get from different departments and offices, I think it's so wonderful. I did want to mention one story that I'd be remiss to not bring up, because I feel like, again, in your capacity, you oversee many, many, many different aspects, in terms of like a certain student's journey, and then, again, student affairs being like a major component of like how students interact with one another and make friends. But, you also play a very important role in not only welcoming students, but being kind of like sounding board for students on a one-to-one basis that are really trying to make sense of just who they are and who they are becoming as global citizens, as good human beings. And from my own experience, I had a very wonderful one-on-one with you when I was about to graduate. And I recall I came into your office and was just basically pouring out all of my anxieties of what is going to happen when I graduate. I've had this wonderful experience, like 4 years at Soka, and now what? And you gave me a small diary with a dragonfly, really beautifully imprinted on this cover, and you spoke about how recording your thoughts and your journeys is going to be really valuable, and that similar to the dragonfly, it represents transformation, and that was over a decade ago.
Mhm.
And I will say that that the simple act of listening and inviting someone to really like value their own experiences by writing it down, I think was such a wonderful way to support me rather than telling me exactly this is what's going to happen. Look out for this. But it was like, no, just go out there and live your life. And I really feel like that was what I needed to hear in that moment. And I'm sure you've had that impact with many other students on campus. So just wanted to make sure the listeners know
Kind of
that,
you.
you know,
Thank you.
yeah.
No, I appreciate that reflection. And I should tell you that um, perhaps early in my career, I thought it was truly about just dispensing some wisdom or, some hopefully sage um, thoughts about life. Um, but there's a kind of reciprocity that happens. These are bilateral relationships, right? Um, and there are students that you become close with, um, maybe because they work in the office or because, they're looking to do a program and, there's a connection made. My door has always been open. And, we're living in a time where communication looks a little different. Engagement looks a little different, in particular, one-on-one engagement. We started out of my office a mentoring program, and we call it Nexus. And this has certainly been one way for me to um, contribute, not necessarily dispense a whole lot of advice, but to be on the journey, with students, and kind of runs the gamut in terms of what we talk about. And in some ways, it's comprehensive. My hope is that I will continue to be sought out, and whether I'm in my office or I'm around campus, I always engage with people. I always greet people, and yeah, that's just part of who I am. And some people find a connection to me from that initial interaction. So I'm glad you did. And I definitely remember that conversation, Scott. And I, um, I was flattered that you would come and share where you were at that time, and that, you were able to, figure a number of things out in a way that turned out to be quite meaningful. And because of that, because we've stayed in touch, um, there's this wonderful benefit for me to be able to hear that that dragonfly was really a wonderful symbol of who you are, as an individual seeking your life, seeking your path, if you would, which is ongoing.
Wow. Thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, very deeply, like I reciprocate those sentiments, and I feel like our friendship has really deepened over the years. Just really appreciate you and all that you've contributed to not only my experience at Soka and beyond, but the students, many students over the years, and the current students. There's such important work to still be done, as it's ongoing work.
Yes.
And I love that you, again, have framed this at multiple, points in our conversation, that your own work is still ongoing. And I think you framed it as you have not quite arrived there yourself, right? So you're still engaged in reflection. You're still extracting deeper meaning out of the decisions that you've made and the places that you're at right now. And I think that that's great modeling for what these students have to look forward to in terms of like the lifelong learning, really asking the big questions, the difficult questions, being in relation to others, growing from differences that others might have. So, so many things that you don't even have to impart, advice. You just live your life and people take notice.
Yes.
I think that's the best way of doing it. So, wanted to ask one final question as we are
Sure.
kind of getting closer to the end of our conversation. And this is a question I ask all of my guests. It's book or movie recommendation. So anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yes. I would say Tipping Point, written by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm intrigued. I'm going to say mostly intrigued by books that really cause us to go deeper. Some work in questioning, some work in observing what is around us. I think, sometimes in life we can move so quickly and we miss things. And oftentimes, there's so much to glean that we can take in that can affect our lives in a positive way. And the tipping point, actually, I think the full title is The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference. And it really explores how small actions, even trends or I'd say maybe social behavior, how all of that kind of can reach a critical mass and then essentially tip and spread and have an impact, a powerful, almost reverberating impact. Um, and I remember just being so moved by that, this sense of collective um, contribution, collective engagement, how all of that can have such a powerful effect on the whole. It makes me think about the greater good. I mean, we can leverage things for good or bad. And, even as a side note, I want to say about kind of going back to Soka. I would not be at Soka for 26 years if I didn't think it was a special place. And and it is a special place because the people make it a special place. And so thinking about the kind of collective whole and all that is happening on the campus, in many ways, I think about the tipping point. And it continues to happen. It's happening on campus. It's happening off campus. It's happening when people graduate from the campus, right? They're going out and they're leading contributive lives. I should say, as a sort of side note, that I think Soka is kind of like a repository for, um, the opportunity to understand your potential. It's where, your seed gets watered, your plant is fertilized. And, there are exceptional people there for sure. There are challenges. There's real life stuff that happens at Soka. Everyone is on their path. It's not all the same path. And I don't know if I would appreciate it any other way because of the uniqueness of it, because of the uniqueness of every individual. And that their paths are all different, but that we come together under Soka with an understanding that, we're going to do something.
Of course. No, thank you so much, Michelle. Uh, Great book recommendation, and I love the subtitle of it because it's true that little things do make a big difference.
Yes.
They reach a certain threshold, but
Yes.
in order to reach that, you have to have steady actions, right? Hence the mission statement of Soka being a steady stream of global citizens, and yeah, and so I feel very proud to be part of that steady stream, and I'm very very appreciative that I've had the opportunities to learn from and be in strong friendship with individuals like you, Michelle, and really appreciate you taking the time to share about your own journey at Soka and the deeper, the deeper ideals and values that you hold close to yourself that allowed you to really contribute to such an extent over the past 26 years and more. So thank you so much, Michelle. And
Thank
wanted to give you
you.
the last word. Any final send off? Any final thoughts as we wrap up this conversation?
Again, so appreciate you taking the time to connect with me. And in this way, I think it really is um, a powerful kind of testimony, if you would, for what you believe in, and to be able to share that with the world. Thank goodness for technology making that possible. um, and yeah, I appreciate the fact that you're keeping the conversation going. And so thank you for that.